Christine, let us start, and I'm going to bring up my slides.
All right. I'll tell you when it's actually working, when it's actually streaming.
Okay,
This-
it's going to take me a second to get my slides up.
We are live on YouTube.
Great.
Thank you for joining our July NWSOFA Fiscal and Economic Forum meeting. Please be aware this meeting is being recorded and being sent to YouTube live. Please don't make me have to edit this video. And let's have a great day.
Okay, welcome, folks, to the NWSOFA, which stands for Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action. We're an indivisible chapter that is located in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. Interesting enough, before we were an indivisible chapter, we were a Organizing for Action chapter under Obama. And so we've been around for about 13 years. We started at the beginning of Obama's second term. 17 of us had been working relentlessly to get him elected, making calls every Tuesday and Thursday night. Once he got elected for the second term, we said, what are we going to do now? Someone suggested we all go to Panera Bread and learn each other's last names and talk about the future. So we decided we were going to become a progressive organization. We didn't know what our name was going to be or anything about that. But at that time, two things happened. One was Michelle and Barack Obama started Organizing for Action. They moved that from Obama for America to Organizing for Action. We became one of the first chapters. And we started with 17 people. And now, right before that happened, Sandy Hook had happened. So our very first issue groups that we started working on as a NWSOFA chapter was gun violence prevention. Now we now have a whole series of groups and chapters, and just a few, issue groups. And we joined Indivisible about 7 years ago, who has now 2,500 chapters across the country. We're getting 5 to 10 new chapters every day. And you can see on this map just all the little spots where we're located. Not a lot in Iowa or North Dakota. All of our issue groups exist to do 3 things: organize and educate our members so that we can communicate to their members and their audiences for their groups. As I was saying before, we have 10 different issue groups. They're located on this dual snowflake. On the right-hand side, that's the turquoise groups. We started with gun violence prevention, went to healthcare, added immigration reform, social justice, added stand with women. Fiscal and economics actually blended in there somewhere between the second and third groupings. We now have election outreach, federal, state, and local, that we're constantly working on. We've added climate change. We have 2 restore our democracy groups, which are kind of a subgroup of NWSOFA. The first one working on voting rights, elections, gerrymandering, vote by mail. The second group was founded on working on confronting disinformation, but now monthly tackles the issue of the day. And they do great presentations once a month on the issues of the day. So that is our issue teams, snowflakes. On the left-hand side in the orange, you see our communications group. We communicate every way we can think of to get the news out so that people know to join our Zooms as we move across the area. We have 28 all volunteer leads that work on getting not only the issue teams, information and speakers and subjects lined up, but also work on getting the information out, sharing the information in almost any way that you can see. We couldn't do it without them. We call these leads our secret sauce. You can just see some of the things that we're doing these days. We actually have three new groups. Vision Forward is one of them that has joined with our organization, part of our national group. And also we have Sorting Soup and Sharing Our Stories. And we now do twice a week uh, on Wednesday at 2 and Thursdays at noon, except for this Thursday we won't be doing. We are doing hands-on working sessions to help leads be more effective. So we've done issued trainings on AI, trainings on Zoom, trainings on Discord, all those different things that we do to make us more effective tonight. Our fiscal and economic group, headed by Carl Fusslish and David Downey, our co-leads, are going to present what I think is basically the longest running fiscal and economic discussion across the country. They've been doing it for almost 12 years, maybe 13 going on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Excuse me, to Carl, and Dave and Carl will share the information that is going on tonight. Just two things to kind of remember. One is if you come up with a question, you can put that question in chat. But if the question, put in all caps before the question in all caps, and then put your question. That's easier for us to find. So there are specific times when we get done with a chapter, so to speak, which usually involves 5 to 7 slides. Then we'll take those questions and try to cover them. You can raise your hand also, or if you got an immediate question, you can kind of just say, "Hey, can I ask a question?" And you can go ahead and do that. So that's how we're handling the Q&A. The other thing that we want to make sure is this is an ongoing presentation of the facts of what is going on in our economy. It's not a place to, in chat or any place else, enter into discussions about why the Dems aren't doing something or what Trump did today. Try to keep the offline chat being pertinent to information about what is being talked about on screen. And we have a couple folks that'll be monitoring that. And so you may have somebody say, please stay on topic. And above all, respect everybody here. So with that, Carl, it is all yours.
So also, this is the July meeting of the NWSOFA.
Carl, we can't hear you. Am I the only one that can't hear Carl?
I cannot hear Carl either. Now okay. Try again, Carl.
Okay, can people hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, welcome. That's the July meeting of the Fiscal and Economic Issues Group.
You know, Carl, I'm sorry, you're still garbled. Christine, is there anything we can do to clear that up?
It looks like it switched back to my phone audio.
It's coming from Carl's side.
Okay.
Unless you can't hear me clearly.
You can be heard, Christine.
Yeah, good, because I pay enough for this internet connection.
Yeah. So Carl is switching to his phone, I think. Go ahead, Carl.
I'm gonna try that, see what happens.
Yeah. All right. We're gonna have to give him a couple minutes.
Can you guys hear me?
Repeat.
You're a little thin, but you're usually thin. So if you speak up a little bit, you come through a lot clearer.
All right, Carl, let me know when you're ready to go. I will just say the topics. Can you guys see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
All right, so typical topics we cover, we do a quick overview. Then we go into the labor market, cover that in depth because that's probably the most important sector in terms of driving the overall economy. We'll go through Trump's tax law that just passed, go through all the implications of that. We've been covering that the past couple of months, so some of this will look familiar, but we have some more recent scoring from the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, for the final law that was passed. We'll go through the tariffs, which are constantly changing and shifting around, so at least can tell you kind of where things stand now. We go through the household finances, so kind of where's net worth at, what's going on in the stock market, what's going on with inflation and wages, and then any other miscellaneous statistics of interest that we run across during the month, we sort of throw into a catch-all category. So, Carl, how you doing over there?
Hopefully I'm back. Can people hear me now?
Yes, you're actually clearer than David.
Excellent.
Okay. All right then. So let's hit the economic overview section and go to the next slide. This is, Trump inherited perhaps the best economy in 50 years from Biden. Low unemployment, high real wages. We had modest job creation in June, 147,000, not bad. And we're at 7.4 million jobs above the pre-pandemic level. For those who've been paying attention to us for a while, we lost 22 million jobs during a couple of months in early 2020, and we're now above that level by another 7.4 million. The unemployment rate fell slightly in June to 4.1%, down from 4.2%. Stocks are up since Trump's inauguration. Prices went up a fair amount in June, which is not necessarily good news. It appears to be part of a tariff impact, but it's unclear since tariffs keep shifting day to day, week to week kind of thing. It's probably going to take a couple of months before that settles down. Real hourly wages were actually flat versus the prior month, and higher by 1.2% versus a year ago. In the household survey, most historical data was positive. President Trump's economic initiatives are increasing the risk of recession via the tariffs, the immigration restrictions, DOGE, etc. And Trump's one big beautiful bill, big quotes around that law, scored by CBO and private think tanks as a large deficit increase, $3 to $4 trillion higher. It also increases the number of uninsured via cuts to Medicaid, as well as some impact to the ACA premium subsidies. The bottom line is that Republican plans between the tariffs and the tax bill hurt the bottom 80% of the country in terms of income and only help the top 20%. So that all worsens inequality. But hey, it's a one big beautiful bill, isn't it? Next slide. The Fed economic forecast, what we see is that the forecast in March, they were projecting 1.7% real GDP growth. They're now projecting 1.4%. If you recall, in the first quarter, real GDP growth was actually negative 0.5%. And it will be the end of July when they'll announce the first estimate of second quarter real GDP growth. So we'll have to see how that goes. unemployment rate, they're suggesting that at the end of the year, will now be up to 4.5%. And that may be true. PCE inflation, they're expecting it to grow. And core PC inflation is going to grow even more. And again, this is mostly tariffs hitting pricing. So this is what we're talking about in terms of if you combine what we know right now about the one big beautiful bill and the tariffs, that for most deciles, most people, they're going to lose money versus without these new Republican policies. It's only the highest deciles that are going to gain money. And in terms of economic data, monthly jobs report is perhaps the most important economic news. It generally shows up on the first Friday of the month. This month it was the first Thursday because the first Friday was the 4th of July. Net number of jobs added or lost tells us the strength and direction of the economy. In general, if we have anywhere between 100 and 150,000 jobs added, that indicates a steady as she goes economy, not really getting better, but not getting worse. And we had plus 147,000 jobs in June, so we were right in that sweet spot. Anything over 150 would be robust job growth. And right now, about 160 million people have jobs. I think that's payroll jobs. And we'll talk about that later. That's from the establishment survey. And that does not include people, does not include your Lyft drivers, your Grubhub drivers, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Somehow we lost the presentation, at least on my screen.
Mine too.
Did we lose that on everybody else's screen too?
I do not see it,
Yes.
Carol.
Looks like David is not
So
online at this moment.
what happened to David?
Oh, I hate when that happens. Let me see if I can find this thing. Hey, I don't have my screen sharing enabled because I'm not a co-host at the moment.
I do not see David at the moment.
Let me see if I can bring it up.
Okay, you're supposed to make me a co-host, Bill. Did you miss that part?
I did.
You're going to let me share my screen.
Yeah.
You can share your screen now.
Okay. See if I can get it.
Chris.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, I think I saw a question in chat. How many jobs did we add in June? It was 147,000. And that's, of course, in this next slide. What is this crazy rectangle at the top of my screen. Anyhow, so we added 147,000 jobs in June, and the adjustments for prior months sent them up an additional 16,000, which gets us to a total payroll jobs of 159,700. 159,700,000, my apologies. And we see is that we had about 152 million prior to the pandemic. We then lost 22 million in a couple of months during the pandemic. We were recovering under Trump. And then we lost jobs in December of 2020 under Trump. And since then, we've been adding jobs every month, both under Biden and then additionally under Trump. But as we can see that the monthly job creation was very robust as we were recapturing those 22 million jobs, and more recently has been much less robust. And there's a caveat here. Officially, there are 70,000 fewer federal employees than there were in January of 2025. However, if we've been paying attention to the news, over 260,000 federal workers have either been fired, have taken buyouts, retired early, or have been earmarked for termination since Trump took office. However, workers on paid leave or severance pay are still considered employed. So that will probably end at the end of the fiscal year after September, so we'll see that in the October numbers. And this is just employment change by industry. We see that it is, this is 6-month change, so it includes January through June, so it includes 1 month of Biden and then 5 months of Trump. And it's much more private employment than government employment. And then people ask, well, do we have to worry about Trump, the Trump administration playing with the numbers? And the short answer to that appears to be no. That there's, independently, there's a company called ADP, who is a payroll servicing company that does estimates of private sector job creation. And we can see that over the last couple of years, they pretty much track what the government is announcing. So unless these two start to diverge greatly for a long period of time, I'm not going to worry too much about the Trump administration playing with the numbers. So the unemployment rate, and this is the U3 unemployment rate, which is the one that's most typically used. It tells us what percentage of the labor force is not working. Historically, the average has been about 5.7% for data all the way back to 1948. So at 4.1%, we're a whole lot lower than that now, based upon a household survey of like 50, 60,000 households called every month. There's a theoretical point below which inflation accelerates. At one point, people thought it was at 6%, but obviously we're much lower than 6%, and we're not seeing inflation accelerate yet. And to the extent we're going to see inflation accelerate, I think it's going to have more to do with the tariffs than the unemployment rate. So anyhow, an unemployed person is someone who has looked for work actively in the past month, is available for work, but did not work any hours during that month. And to repeat what I just said, this rate is historically low. When Trump took office, the rate was 4.7%. When he left office, it was 6.4%, which is consistent with every Republican president except Reagan, who left office with a higher, all the other Republican presidents left office with the unemployment rate higher than when they started. And Democrats have left office with the unemployment rate lower than when they started. That said, unemployment's low point was back in January 2023, and the number of people unemployed has now grown by about 1.3%, 1.3 million since then. So that's not a good trend. Not a terrible trend, but not a good trend. And this is what the household survey looks like. This is just the June numbers. We see that the population increased, the number of people in the labor force decreased, so the labor force participation rate decreased. Interestingly, the number of people employed actually increased, and the number of people unemployed decreased substantially, which led to the unemployment rate decreasing by the 0.13%, how we went from 4.2% unemployment to 4.1% unemployment. And if we look at the 6 months, or 5 months since Trump started, what we see is that the data is not nearly as good. The labor force has shrunk by 364,000. Participation rate's down by 0.3%. The number of people employed is down by 529,000. The employment to population ratio is down. The number of people unemployed is up. The unemployment rate is higher. So basically, overall, not good, but not, again, an unemployment rate of 4.1, 4.2%, and all these other numbers are not terrible. A lot of it will depend on what happens between now and, let's say, the midterms, when people are going to vote on how they're feeling about the economy. And the employment, one of the things we look at is the employment to population ratio of prime age workers between 25 and 54%, because these typically exclude people who are in school and people who've retired. And what we see is that we're basically right back where we were prior to the pandemic, but that's not a bad thing. And job openings to unemployed, we see that during the pandemic, we lost those 22 million jobs. There were a lot more unemployed than there were job openings. And for a period of time, we had a lot more job openings than we had unemployed. The ratio was twice as many job openings as there were unemployed. Now, about a 1-to-1, a little bit better in terms of job openings versus the number of people who are unemployed. And our friends in the conservative media like to talk about how all the blue states are doing terribly. And that does not appear to be true. This is just looking at Illinois, Prior to the pandemic, we're basically right back where we were. California, we're higher than we were. In New York, we're higher than we were. So blue states are not doing terribly. And if we look at states by average annual income, we see that the blue states have much higher average annual income than a lot of the red states. People talk about how a lot of people have moved from Illinois to Indiana for jobs. And if you want to make 10% less, go ahead and move. But that's about what the difference is. Now, David, I'm going to go ahead and let you talk about the details of the One Big Beautiful Bill. I will merely make one opening comment that it's probably going to lead to higher deficits in the near term, but they're not cutting off the safety net until after the midterms in an attempt to try and win the midterms. But I'm going to stop sharing. I will let David share and handle the One Big Beautiful Bill. Tell me he's back.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, I switched to my internet backup, so hopefully it will work better than my main one. So let's see. Can you see that, Carl?
I can, yes.
Yeah.
All right.
And I can hear you well.
Did you want to take questions that came up during the Carl's session?
Sure.
Oh, sure.
There was a question around the job creation that was sort of before and after. And I put the chart into the chat so that people could see it. Let me go over there just for a second. And the question was, can we show the new jobs that were created during the Biden era that weren't bounce back jobs? It was a common refrain that all the jobs are, bounce back jobs and there's no new job creation. We've gone through these myths, throughout the Biden era. And so there were 16, and let me bring this over here. Can you guys see the chat full screen?
I can't.
Yeah, only if we adjust ourselves for our own.
Okay, so I will let you guys do that. I'll leave mine. I guess it doesn't do it that way. But so there were 16 million jobs added throughout Biden's term, and then 6.7 million of those were after we regained the pre-pandemic peak in June of 2022. So we got back to that February of 2020 level in June of 2022. And then after that, we added those 6.7 million jobs. And so when you break that down into monthly amounts, no matter how you slice it, Biden is going to be ahead of Trump even before the pandemic. And it's not really close. If you handicap Biden and you just measure him from after July of 2022, it's 240,000 jobs a month versus 180 for Trump before the pandemic. So about 60,000 jobs a month faster on average under Biden. And if you measure Biden from inauguration, you're talking about 350,000 jobs a month. And then there's some data over there in the yellow about some complicated things they do where they revise the numbers and reset them, but it doesn't change the bottom line. I mean, Trump, even Obama's second term had faster job creation than Trump before the pandemic. Trump had inherited a solid economy from Obama, and it was slowing down a little bit as we sort of got to a really high economic peak. It was tough to do much better than Trump was doing right before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit. But once you get to that place where there's very, very low unemployment, 3.5, 3.6, it becomes harder to add lots and lots of jobs. And that was something that was unusual about Biden, is even when we got down to that 3.6 average unemployment rate in 2022 and 2023, which was the best we've done since the late 1960s, we still had pretty solid job creation in there. And, now things have come off of that bottom. We're now at more like 4.1% unemployment. So we're not quite as, the economy is not booming like it was in that 2023 period. from an employment standpoint. So every now and then, Carl and I will do a Democrats are way better than Republicans at everything presentation or module in our presentation, and we'll do that at some point in the next few months. But you'll typically see a pattern like this. The Democrats have much faster job creation than Republicans, and we've got a slide at the end of our presentation in here that covers some of that. It's like 51 million versus 1 million when you look at the jobs added under the last three presidents of each party. It's both of the Bushes, and then Trump actually had, both of the Bushes had a little bit of job creation. Trump lost jobs by the end of his administration, hadn't recovered fully from the pandemic. So the Democrats way outperform. And even if you adjust that for some different puts and takes, the Democrats are still far, far ahead. What's the Biden-Trump comparison of bankruptcies? I don't have that. We'll have to add that to the list. Would it possible to show?
Well, Biden never declared bankruptcy, and Trump has declared bankruptcy multiple times. But I don't think that was the question.
I'm wondering if he was thinking about personal bankruptcies, but I like that better. So yeah, let's see. Would it be possible to show employment by county? Let's see. I'm sure we can find it somewhere. I know we can get it by state. I've got an interesting map of the state I can dig out somewhere. So I'll look through that when Carl takes back some of this. Does the jobs number account for all the federal employees that have been fired? And we had a slide on that. It does not. There are a lot of them that are still on severance pay, and they're considered employed as long as they're still getting paid. Once that stops in another 3, 4, 6 months, then you'll see, another 100,000 or perhaps 200,000 federal employees that have been let go. And that assumes that a lot of these lawsuits are that they don't get their jobs back. Bear in mind, the Supreme Court in many cases has thrown the case back to the lower courts, but they have not stopped Trump from doing what he wants to do in the interim. So a lot of these people could be put back to work depending on what the court system does, but I'm not holding my breath.
David?
Yep.
There is a question in there from 7:13 p.m. Central Time from Bruce Lane. So it's way at the beginning of the chat.
I don't see that.
Maybe because we
Well, that's
lost you.
because you.
That may be it. Does somebody else want to answer it or ask it and we can try to answer?
Sure, I can read it. It says, if possible, could the presenters shed light on the reality of the fiscal situation of farmers given the results of the tariffs on Canada and China? There is a lot of doom and gloom videos out there, but I would like to know what is real. Similarly, I have seen a lot of videos on the status of border communities being hurt by the tariffs.
No, those are both.
I don't have the data.
Yeah,
I don't have the data on farmers. And I would also say, given the tariffs are changing day to day, week to week, it will be a while before we'll be able to get much solid information to be able to answer that question.
We'll keep an eye out for it. Those are good questions. And yeah, you would assume that any business that was servicing immigrants is going to be feeling it. The more of those folks that are sent out of the country. And we're due for a module on immigration as well. So good questions. Both we'll work on that.
And there's one more that was at 7:15, so you might not have that one either.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
And it's from Beth, and it says labor market forecast would be helpful. I lost my job in the NSF cuts. Is the job market, real job, not minimum wage, going to go up?
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot of what's going on in the labor market. I mean, the job creation is still steady, nearly 150,000 a month. Wages are very solid, some of the highest wages ever, adjusted for inflation, going back to when the data originates in the 1960s. It's a great time to be employed right now. There are some people that are out. It's getting harder for college graduates, apparently, to find jobs. A lot of corporations are on hold with a lot of this uncertainty. So there's some data out there that's saying it's harder to find jobs now. But the good news is the unemployment rate is still very low, and there are a lot of job openings, as Carl mentioned, that are out there. They're not all minimum wage. No, they're not all minimum wage. No.
We have some feedback.
They're not going to be all.
Hopefully no bomb.
All right.
There we
Any
go.
other questions early on?
No, that would be it.
All right. Did Biden have better job creation and low unemployment partially because immigrants and temp workers allowed more flexibility to create and fill new jobs? The vast majority of the jobs that were filled net since that pandemic peak was regained were by foreign-born workers. I'm amazed that Trump has been able to maintain the job creation that we have with the blocks on immigrants that he's put in. So I'm curious to see how long that is sustained. We have some data. Carl shared the household survey data that shows that the number of, well, we'll share that in a little bit, actually. We didn't share it there, but the number of foreign-born workers is down since Trump started, and the number of native-born workers is up. Although you have to wonder, are people going to answer the phone call saying that they are foreign-born workers under these conditions? So it's interesting that these jobs we're still creating jobs at the rate we are with the immigrants being blocked. But definitely during the Biden era, there was the immigration surge was a huge economic boost. There were millions of jobs that were filled just at the right time. The supply hit right when the demand was peaking, and Biden put all those millions and millions of people to work, many of them foreign born. And again, we're due to share some slides on the immigrants, but immigrants make us as a country vastly richer. The Congressional Budget Office did a study that puts it at about 9 trillion more GDP over the next decade, thanks to the Biden surge, which it works out to about $65,000 per household. So it's a giant amount of money that this surge represents, and blocking it or reversing it is going to damage the economy. So we'll share that information. It's helpful to get that in context. Once you hear a lot about our local communities that are suffering because they have a lot of immigrants that are in their schools. I mean, there are certain pockets of the country that get hit, but overall, it's a giant boost. And they also reduced the deficit nearly $1 trillion over that decade by paying a lot more in taxes. But because they're younger, they're not getting Medicare or Social Security. So it's a huge win, at least bringing in young immigrants now when you've got an aging population. And we'll see how long the economy can go without that sort of stream of new workers. All right, last one. Many job openings or creations of jobs will be harvesting crops because of this regime. That is what the job numbers will be representing here on out. Too many afraid to work have been kidnapped. Well, there's definitely some of that going on, and the farmers are going to be, you're going to start hearing probably farmers are suffering and prices are going to go up for things like tomatoes and other things that are harvested by immigrants. But right now it's still pretty anecdotal. We're not seeing a lot of impact in any of the main aggregate numbers. So more to come on that. These are good questions. That's the end of the list. We got one more, but let's put that on hold for now. We have a question on housing prices. I don't have the latest data on that and the regional variances. We do a housing piece every now and then, but the housing prices are extremely high. They're up like 50% versus pre-pandemic, so like double the rate of inflation. And so if you're one of the 65% of households that own a home, you are thrilled. If you're one of those 35% who are renters and would like to buy a home, not so thrilling. And so we will see. All right, let me come back to that question. Let's resume the presentation. Because I've been looking at the chat here, let me hide that. Can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Sure, we've got it. Okay, good. So Steve Ratner is a really wonderful resource. I encourage you to follow him on Twitter or Blue Sky. He is the MSNBC charts guy. He goes on Morning Joe in the morning and talks about this stuff. He worked in the Obama administration, but he's excellent at explaining these things and helping with these, takes graphs from the best sources and shares them. Pretties them up first, then he shares them, and then we steal them. But we give him credit. So it's in there. But what you're seeing is that, there are going to be very big tax cuts relative to what would have happened otherwise if all those tax cuts had expired. And there's also, though, a lot of spending on border and immigration, meaning they're going to be powering up ICE dramatically to conduct these raids and try to expel as many immigrants as they can and build, I don't want to use a loaded word, let's call them camps or jails for immigrants before they ship them out. And so there's a lot of spending that's going to be happening in that space that got funded. Somebody was comparing the funding for ICE to be like larger than the US Marine Corps. So there is a lot of spending going on in that space. One hopes that it is not used as to become Trump's private militia. At some point, it's a very scary concept, I think, for anybody paying attention that there's that much money going to get spent on this group. And then you also see some spending being cut, so Medicaid being cut, some tax credits being eliminated, which is bad for clean energy. And also students are going to be paying a lot more in student loan amounts. If you have student loans that you've been able to not pay for a while, the Trump administration is going to find a way to make you pay. They're also, as you know, dismantling the Department of Education, which is going to be making it harder to get student loans even originated. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 million people will likely lose their health insurance, mainly because of different rules on Medicaid. So work requirements, eligibility rules, limiting payments to providers. There's a variety of causes of where that 10 or 12 million people comes from. You'll see different numbers. The 10 million is like the straight up Medicaid impact. And then there's another 5 or 6 million, depending on how Trump sabotages the Affordable Care Act. So there are some amounts there were some things that were done in the Biden era that were helping people get access to the marketplaces and others. And some of that is going away, which is another, 4 to 6 million people that are at risk there. So this could offset, 2/3 of the benefit we got from the Affordable Care Act, 15 or 16 million people out of the 23 million more that got health care thanks to the ACA. So a lot of damage being done in this area. Here's something about the student loan payments. So you can see the amounts that are likely to go up depending on what your annual income is. You could see a lot higher monthly payments because of that. And they give an average over there. Typical loan recipient making $80,000, which is the median household income. So that's a lot for one person, but not a ton if they're the family breadwinner. $3,000 per year more from the student loans. The climate change benefits that we saw from the Biden administration are also being reversed. So a lot of money that wasn't spent or tax credits that were available are being repealed so that there's less incentive for people to build clean energy structures. And there's some text there on it, but it's a very big hit, and it allows China and other countries to take advantage of that and build their businesses in those areas while the US lags behind. So it's really hurting our competitiveness to get rid of those incentives for people to build. There's been a lot of building going on under Biden, was a lot of building, and we'll see how that is affected over time. And we'll see that in the GDP numbers. If business investment starts falling off a cliff, we'll know that this has had the kind of impact that's being forecast here. Overall, just the law by itself is adding somewhere in that 3 to 4 trillion range over a decade. And every decade, and those numbers will ratchet up as the economy gets bigger. So when you cut taxes, the CBO always does these estimates over 10 years, and so do other think tanks. But those things continue over many years, like the Bush tax cuts of 2001 and 2003 are still with us. So only the top 2% or so had those reversed by Obama. And that was in like 2012 or 2013, I think. And so, those lasted a decade, but the bottom 98% or so, those tax cuts are still there. And then Trump cut those even further. So you're seeing, different studies show that the revenue losses from the tax cuts under, starting with Reagan, but then under Bush 43 and Trump are somewhere between a third and a half of why our debt has gone up. Recessions are a big part of it. There are other causes, but the tax cuts are an enormous contributor to the large debt problem we have. And Republicans don't like to admit that, so they say it's a spending problem, not a revenue problem. That's not really the case. I'll show you some slides on that later. This is the impact on the deficit and debt. So the diagram on the left shows the annual deficits, which were we're supposed to climb. That's the baseline, the dotted black line. It was supposed to go and climb all the way up to 2.75 trillion a year by 2035. Now those numbers are, another almost $1 trillion higher, or 0.75 trillion higher, in that orange and pink space, depending on what happens. Because some of the tax benefits, like the no tax on tips and other things, are not permanent. They are for like 4 years, then they expire. Whereas the income tax rate table amount reductions that Trump did in 2017, those things are permanent, meaning they're permanent until the law is changed. They will not expire. Nothing is permanent. It can be reversed with any law being passed. And the impact on the debt to GDP ratio is it'll be considerably higher than it would have been under the baseline. This is another chart looking at just the law itself. We said the bottom 80% suffer between the tariffs and the law. Just the law by itself hurts the bottom 20%. Doesn't do much one way or the other for the next 20%. And the top 60% comes out a little bit ahead from the tax cuts. That's the group that has higher incomes. And the bottom 40% either don't get a benefit or get hurt. And mostly the people at the bottom that are getting hurt is not because they just don't get much benefit from the tax cuts, but they get hit by the Medicaid cuts and the SNAP cuts, SNAP being food stamps, and other sort of welfare hits, if you will. We have a very optimistic White House Council of Economic Advisors that thinks that the economy is going to start booming all of a sudden from the tax cuts. I wouldn't bank on it. I think most of the others don't agree with that and are definitely more likely to be right. A miracle could happen, but the Fed and everybody else is in that 1% to 2% growth range. They're not in this 4% growth range that the White House Council is in.
Well,
all right.
You mean
so
you don't? We didn't.
Let's pause
you mean
this
after
section.
the 2017 tax bill?
I'm sorry?
After the 2017 tax bill, we didn't get that 4+% real GDP growth that they promised us?
Nope. Yeah, and we didn't get good growth. I mean, Trump before the pandemic, we had growth that was approaching 3%, and we had growth almost identical under Biden. So they both grew about the same rate. Those tax cuts didn't make a huge difference. But when you increase the deficit, you're going to get generally a little bit of a boost to the economy. It's going to grow a little faster than it would, which is what most of these guys say, at least in the short run. And then they don't say that, though, in the long run. It sort of doesn't make a big difference in the long run. You get that initial boost in your income, and then you don't get the boost after that. So the economy is not going to grow faster because of that. You get the initial boost, and then it's sort of, the growth is going to be boosted unless you get another chunk of money from a bigger tax cut. All right. So let's take a look we'll stop there. Let's take questions, and then we'll take a break. Let me look at the chat. Where will we see the loss of tax dollars that used to be collected from immigrant workers hit? That will be most noticeable. Yeah, I mean, we will see the revenue drop off, but it's very difficult to see that particular line item is not something that is tracked in the studies that I've typically seen. Where you'll find it, though, is that some think tanks will look into it and they will tell us, how much that is. But once we get estimates of how many immigrant workers have left, we can probably do a back of the envelope calculation on that. So it's a number we could derive or guess at, but generally when workers are leaving the economy, the government is missing out on, 20% of whatever they were getting paid. And we just have to figure out how many of them have been affected. And let's see. Good question here. Might the restrictions on student loan force colleges to find a way to lower costs? I think there is an upside there. There was a study I saw some years ago from a pretty credible source that said that a lot of student loans, because they drive demand for college education, they also drive up the price. And so they're paying professors more, they're building better facilities. Hopefully people are getting a better education, but they're paying a lot more. If you take away that stimulus money, so to speak, if you don't give loans to people, college costs will come down. There's almost no way they won't, but a lot fewer people are going to be going. And so there's a trade-off there of, do you want a lot more people educated at a higher price, or do you want fewer people educated at a little bit lower price? So there's an argument to be made either way, but that's a good observation that you definitely could see college costs come down because the government is not subsidizing it as much. Let's see.
Well, if I'm a Republican, I don't want any more of those damn liberal Democrat, college-educated Democrats.
That's right. That's a big part of it is, the educated people are able to resist that right-wing propaganda a lot better. I think of facts and good argumentation like you pick up here are sort of an immunization against Republican nonsense. And like when Trump goes on TV and he says the price of gas is falling or all these other prices have fallen since I became president, we'll show you a slide that says that's a lie. Everybody that goes through our meeting is going to know that in advance, but a lot of Republicans are going to think, is that actually true? And they might not know better. And so they'll say, well, he's our guy, we're going to believe it. Whereas somebody that has the facts in advance and is sort of immunized against that noise will be like, he's lying. Do you factor in the interest that we will be paying on the debt? And yes, the Congressional Budget Office does that. A couple of those slides just showed it without. The interest adds like another $500 billion. So when you see that's why I widen the range from like 3 to 4 trillion. The CBO will say like it's 3 to 3.5 trillion. And then I add that. They've also said that it's another 500 billion if you add in the interest. So yes, not always obvious on some of these slides, but when you hear a number more like 4 trillion from the Trump bill, that's including interest. Closer to 3, that's not including the interest, or 3.5. How much risk is Powell at of being removed from his office? I get surprised daily by what I see. I mean, I think Powell's doing a fantastic job. He has a lot of credibility out there. And so Trump wants to find somebody that'll give him lower interest rates. We'll see, but I think he would be foolish to replace Powell. But, who knows? I'm looking at some of the other questions. A couple of them are more comments. How will the growth and deficit affect our grandchildren? I've heard the liability will amount to 300,000. Hold that question a little while, because there's a slide I like to share with people that says the national debt is 36 trillion approximately, but the household net worth in the United States is about 160 trillion. So you have but to tax the rich. And so whether the liability or, what that liability is going to be down the road, again, by definition, any liability, those government bonds, they are an asset for investors. So if the liability is being passed to the grandchildren, the asset must also be passed to the grandchildren by definition. We have a wealth inequality problem that needs to be solved, and we can solve that by taxing the rich a lot more and paying for things for everybody else. But the idea of generational inequity from this is something I don't believe it as a good argument. I think we have a wealth inequality argument. We should focus on that. I don't think you should be losing sleep over ethics of incurring debt now because the government issues the bond and then the investors have it. So, you know, yeah, the effect on the no tax on Social Security is an interesting one. That's not what actually happened. What happened is the elderly got another deduction of like 6 or 7,000. I forget the exact number. And so if you look at that, then in theory, a certain number of people won't pay tax, you know, that will offset whatever tax liability they had. On the other hand, that deduction phases out if you're wealthier, and those were the people paying most of the Social Security tax anyway. So we owe you a good accounting for that. I've seen a good NPR article on it, but it's not no tax on Social Security. That's what he said, but it's really just, it ended up being an elderly deduction. And we'll explain that. I'm going to take a note here for a future one, elderly deduction, and we'll clarify that, but it's not, no tax on Social Security is not a thing. And the Social Security Administration sent out a very misleading note on that. And they've since walked that back. But there is a benefit for seniors is you've got a new deduction that you didn't have. And if your income is significant enough to appreciate that, then you will get a nice deduction. It's sort of the middle of the range. Like if your income is somewhere in that, like, don't quote me on this, but it was like between like 80 to 130 is sort of the sweet spot of elderly income to get the most benefit from it. If you're not making that much money, you're not going to have much, you weren't paying much tax anyway. And if you were making a lot more than that, it's phased out. So it's sort of that, you know, upper middle class is the group I would say that is doing well from that new deduction. All right, so let's take a break. Let's resume at what time do you think, Carl?
Let's go 8:15.
All right, let's do
I've got
8:15.
8:04 currently. So.
We'll continue with the other stuff, and if you have questions during the break, we can answer some of them. And you can talk. I mean, during these breaks, it's okay if you have a question, you want to raise your hand. If you're more comfortable with the chat, go ahead, but we can talk between now and 8:10 if you have a burning question that we didn't get to. Bill, I saw you speaking, but you were on mute. Were you asking a question or making a comment?
I was, but now that I think of it, I'm not sure I made any sense. So
Second time's the charm. All right.
okay, Carl mentioned that we really don't know the impact of tariffs because they're fluctuating. They're all over the place. And I'll confess, even though I try to stay on top of it, I'm not sure where the tariffs are right now. I think that there was
That's our next
across the
section.
board. Oh, okay. Then I'll just be quiet and I'll be educated.
And I can assure you that after we go through that lengthy discussion, we will still be confused. It is very tricky. There is one number though that is a hard number that I've seen. The Congressional Budget Office said that we've collected about 50 billion more in tariffs than last year. And it by their count, they gave a percent change, and I'll show you the slide a little later. But that is, I think there's about 75, somewhere in that neighborhood, 75, 80 billion now that we've collected so far this year in tariffs. And that's the fiscal year. So that's October to now, so 9 months. And that number is accelerating. Today, the White House press secretary used a 100 billion number. And it seemed like that might be a credible number too. So let's say 100 billion because it's a nice round number. What that means is an increase well, it's 100 billion total. It's probably 70-ish billion more than we collected before. But for scale, that much money, $100 billion is about $800 per household in higher taxes. So that when you hear, gee whiz, look at how great it is that we're collecting all this tariff revenue, understand that a tariff is a tax that will eventually get passed on to the American consumers, and it works out at about $100 billion is about 800 per household. So our taxes have been raised by $800. Now, do we think that's good, bad, indifferent? That's a value judgment. Are you willing to pay higher taxes to reduce the deficit? Some people are. It's a terrible way to do it because it's very regressive. It hurts the poor more. We just today literally are starting to see some early indicators of inflation from tariffs. So some people were drilling down into the nitty-gritty of the components of the inflation number and starting to share some data around, toys are starting to go up. They jumped last month. We're starting in the micro level there, and I haven't gone into that depth yet. We just have the high level inflation numbers in here today, but next month we'll start to share some of that. You're starting to see tariff type goods prices rising on them, and that's how the tax is translated to consumers. It's paid by importing companies, and then they pass the cost along, and we all pay higher prices. But 800 a household is a good chunk of change. And if Trump's successful in implementing the tariffs, the numbers I'm going to share with you in a minute are more like 2,000 per year per household, assuming those tariffs all go through where they currently are. If they're sustained at the level that is currently, what he's saying the tariff is going to be, assuming it sticks, it's 2,000 per year per household in higher costs. And this is where the inflation thing becomes interesting, is that you get this one time or an increase in prices over, say, a year, and then assuming the tariffs don't go up again, there's no reason for inflation to start rocketing from there. Inflation might go back to 1 or 2%, but you're going to be at a higher price level. And so you're going to see inflation for several months that's higher than it would have been otherwise. Like we had 0.3 this month. Maybe it would have been 0.2 without the tariffs. We had a 0.1, I think, last month. So, we'll see. But yeah, we'll go through all the data, but it's just like could change tomorrow, I'm going to take a short break. I'll be back in a couple.
Okay. Got a question about groceries continuing to rise every week. And I guess the overall inflation numbers somewhat reflect that. Next week here in the Chicago area, I can get pints of blueberries for 99 cents, but I won't be able to get pounds of cherries for 99 cents anymore, which is what I could get through today. And that $2 a pound ground beef last month was a one-time thing. We're back up in the $4 to $6, $7 a pound range. Okay, Julie has her hand raised.
Yes.
Looks like so.
Would you like me to unmute her?
sure she can unmute herself, or
Okay,
Oh,
you can
I
unmute her
can.
and
there you go.
Hello. Yeah, I just put a couple things in the chat, but one of them was, and this is, I don't know. Anyway, I'll just ask it. With all the renewable energy credits and everything going away, being rolled back, um, what would be your guess, or do you think it would be a good or bad idea for individuals to invest in renewable energy?
I don't make predictions for investments for people.
Okay, but yeah, all right. Just because it seems like if I guess I'm just thinking in terms of um, environmentally, if we want to keep, I don't know. I guess if we want to continue in that direction, with or without, I mean, what other avenues would we have to do that? And if the rest of the world around us, like China, is still going in that direction, I mean, is that kind of become more of an investment in international then, instead of our own? Or, I mean, yeah, I don't want to I understand where you're coming from as far as investments, but I'm just trying to talk in more general terms about like, how can we help the earth still with all these, things that are being rolled back?
Elect
What can
Democrats.
we do, if anything?
Elect Democrats and throw out the Republicans.
Okay.
How we can help the earth.
I don't know. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
You know, we can look into that. I'm curious to watch how this investment in clean energy proceeds from here and what the effect is going to be, because some businesses have committed to it already and they may wind up making good profits even without those incentives. They might not have needed them, but in some cases there are going to be decisions not to invest. And so the category in GDP is fixed investment, and we can actually see that figure. And if there is a big slowdown in clean energy, we'll be able to see it right in the aggregate data. And then there will be think tanks that are analyzing these particular industries, and we'll be able to see it. Goldman Sachs has a pretty robust economics department, and they're always putting out studies on this or that, and they'll be hitting that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, let's resume, I guess. Yeah, we're at 8:15. So we're going to talk tariffs now. So Bill had a question on it. We talked a little bit about it, and let's get into that. So here is a summary of the tariffs. It's almost always bad news that you're going to get at the aggregate economic level. You know, the tariffs help some people. The protected industries are going to see better job creation or retention. They're going to see some higher prices for their goods and more profit in those industries. But what happens is overall, there's an efficiency loss that is much larger than the benefit for that small group. And we've talked before that there may be industries that are strategic, you know, our defense industry, and maybe we can interpret our car industry as that. There may be certain industries that you want to protect and make the case for that. But when you do general tariffs, you create a lot of economic inefficiency, you do a lot of damage, and that's what's listed here. So I've highlighted some of the things, but higher unemployment, lower employment levels, higher prices, somewhere around $2,000 a household per year, much higher apparel and shoe prices, slower economic growth, which means slower income growth. You know, GDP is a measure of production, but it's also a measure of income. There's a corresponding number called gross domestic income, which tracks it, and it's less income. And on the positive side, from a deficit reduction standpoint, if those tariffs go in, you know, you're looking at 2.6 trillion over 10 years, which is going to offset a lot of the impact of the on the deficit of the OBA, of the big beautiful bill. And that is, it works out to about 2,000 per household more in taxes that are being paid. One of the things I'm trying to figure out is if we're paying higher prices, you know, basically it's to what extent does this 2,000 that's highlighted in blue overlap with the second bullet, the 2,300 and the 1,900? I think they do overlap, but I've got to learn a little bit more about it. But figure 2,000 a household is a pretty round number, and that's about, it seems to be where this is. You don't add them. And then there's just a note on the tariff rate of what that is. And I'll show you some slides that explain where that is in historical context. It's extremely high, measured for the last 100 years. And once upon a time, going way back in time, there were higher tariffs than that. But you got to get back into like the 1800s, I think, to see that. So this is only through the first quarter. And this is an annualized number. So if the tariff collection that we had this quarter times 4 basically gives you this number. And so somewhere in that 90-ish billion range, it's probably going to be, you know, 50% or double that in height. We should see a pretty big spike in the second quarter, I'm assuming. Just this data hasn't been updated yet in FRED. So we will see. FRED being the Federal Reserve Economic Database, which has all the statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. It's a great tool. And whenever you see this blue outline, you know, that's what we're sharing. This is from a think tank that is trying to estimate tariffs. They're figuring about 100 billion this year, and that is calendar year. That isn't fiscal year. So that's this one's since January. And again, I mentioned this to Bill, the fiscal year to date, the Congressional Budget Office says they've collected 76 billion, which is up 50 billion versus the same period last year. So last year was 26, and that's through the first 9 months of the fiscal year. I know this is hard to read. But it's, you know, somewhere in that 2,000 to 2,500 range is the impact on people, and about $2.5 trillion more revenue being collected over that time. How this plays out, how tariffs affect you based on where you are in the income distribution. These are deciles. So 1 is the poorest 10%, and 10 is the richest 10%. The richest 10%, think of them as buying lots of these imported goods. They're buying the fancy televisions and all this other stuff. And so they get the biggest hit in terms of dollars, but it's not that big in terms of percent of income, less than 1% of their income. It's 3.2% of the income of that bottom 10% group, which think of apparel, clothing for kids, you know, the essentials that they need, those, and food as well. Those things are going to be higher. They're a bigger percentage of what those people and the people in the bottom 10% buy. Ernie Tedeschi worked for the Obama administration, I think, or Biden, one of the two. He's also a really great source to follow, and he's the principal at the Yale Budget Lab. So follow Ernie, you're going to get some great information, and I suggest you check out the Yale Budget Lab. They have studies on all sorts of economic topics, and they've become a go-to source for a lot of journalists trying to get their arms around this stuff. Usually the Yale Budget Lab updates very quickly, whereas the CBO is more deliberate and takes more time and looks at things over a longer time. The Yale Budget Lab is going to have stuff really quick. Like when Trump switches on tariffs, they update their analysis almost overnight. This is the GDP level, saying it's going to be a little bit lower over time. And so that means that all of us are going to be 0.4% poorer on average than we would have been otherwise. Our incomes will be that much lower than they would have been otherwise over time. Here's the effective tariff rate just recently. So this is this calendar year. So there's the big jump around April 2nd from the Trump announcement. I'm going to show you, so it's 17%, I think, is that it? 17.6. this is going back in history, back to the 1800s. You can see we've had much higher tariffs in our long past, but since since like 1940, we've been really below this level. Here are some details on what the current tariff policy is. So if you're wondering who's being tariffed on what, this is some of the best detail I could find. I think this was from the Yale Budget Lab, and I'm not sure I should have put the source on here, but whatever it is, I don't just randomly pick these. There's somebody good put this thing out there. So if you're interested in what these amounts are and by country, here's some detail for you. Here's another one by country, the effective tariff rate. Pre-substitution means that, and post-substitution means, you know, if a company is buying its stuff from China and China gets a tariff, it'll go to Vietnam, or it'll go, substitution takes time, but people will do it, and those industries will be built in other countries. If the tariff is sustained in China, the business will go to a lower tariff place. Here was the press secretary today saying, pardon me, rah-rah, $100 billion in tariff revenue. That is about $800 in tax hikes for an average household in the United States. And again, if you think that's a good, you are happy doing that because you want to pay down the deficit, there you go. What you're going to see is you're paying more for goods, and that tax dollar is going to the government to help them. Well, I'm sure we don't want it to go to ICE, but it's going to the government. Let's put it that way. The deficit is coming down relative to other choices. Let me pause there. Any questions on tariffs before we go into the next section? I would hesitate to talk about where the 10-year bond yield is going. I know the 30 just hit 5%, which is high. The stock market seems to be, well, I would say before today was kind of ignoring the results, though today there's sort of that inflation. The tariffs and inflation are probably starting to overlap a little bit. If the inflation data continues to be bad, what that would mean, or going the wrong direction, it's still pretty low, but if that 0.3 is to start repeating and people feel like tariffs are starting to bite, then what you'll likely see are interest rates are going to rise, and it's going to be less likely the Fed cuts rates. The Fed will stay higher for longer, as the saying goes, and that will affect the stock market. People will react to that because the stock market is very sensitive to where people think interest rates are going. And to the extent that they think the Fed is going to stay higher for longer, the stock market will take a bit of a hit. So it did take a hit today, but you know, I'll share some data with you in a minute. The stock market broke even under Trump now. It's a little bit up from where it was when he was inaugurated. It was down like 18% at one point after the main tariff announcement, and now it's come back to sort of par. I mean, underlying all of this, as scary as inflation or this or that might be, if the economy starts slowing, the Fed is going to be under more and more pressure to lower those interest rates, which the stock market loves. And right now, the forecast is that those rates will be coming down over the next couple of years, and that is going to be an upward force on the market. That's why I'm not a market forecaster, but I'm not worried about, I don't lose sleep over the stock market cratering when there's a direct path to lower interest rates that the Federal Reserve governors are saying is out there. It just may be postponed a little bit.
David?
Question? Yeah, go ahead.
We have a hand raised. Would you like to take a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I actually put it in the chat, but I think you may have missed it. So I'll just go ahead and say it. So in the very first slide on tariffs, it looked when I read it that the tariff revenue was higher in 2022 under Biden than under Trump, but I'm sure I must have been misreading that. So it was I can't see the slide numbers in my view. Yeah. So isn't that what this shows?
That's correct. That is correct. Now, I think, though, you're going to see a big jump in the second quarter. There wasn't much time for tariffs to run in the first quarter. There wasn't a lot of it. So I think you're seeing just sort of the fluctuation of the past couple of years. That second quarter, we should see a jump. And it's an annualized rate, meaning if if we were collecting a lot of tariffs in the second quarter, they're going to multiply that by 4 basically, so that we can see where the tariffs are. So I think you're on the right track. Let's see what this looks like next quarter. I think it should go higher than 100, most likely.
Yeah, so just so I'm clear though, is Trump implemented tariffs during his first term. Biden kept most, but not all of those tariffs, and maybe even made some additional tariffs in the field of semiconductors. The reason I'm concerned just a little bit is we have been talking about like the sky is falling with tariffs, right? And all the negative consequences. And yet in 2022, under the previous administration, through either because he kept existing tariffs from Trump or added new tariffs on his own, we're at a higher level than we are currently. So, and recognizing that 2025 isn't over and it's going to go up, and then the follow-on question is, what then caused the tariffs to go down in 23 and 24? Was that simply because Biden got rid of some of the tariffs that were put in place during the Trump administration, or what explains the trend line?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me research that. I don't have an answer for you. I would think, and Carl may have a view here, 2022, some of that may be distorted by the pandemic, meaning people were importing more stuff than typical, but I won't swear to that. I need
Hey,
to dig
David,
into it. Yep.
by the way, it takes a while for the tariffs to have their effect, right? So you can imply the tariff. Anything currently shipping, right, is already shipped. Okay, you don't know better.
Mhm.
Oh, wait, I don't have to buy the next one though. So the tariff worked, right? It prevented me from buying the next pair of shoes, right? Well, if I don't buy the shoes, then you're not going to collect the tariff on those shoes.
Yeah.
So it should peak and then trough.
Yeah.
I don't.
Again, just trying to better understand the trend and also trying to be as objective as we can, where in other words, we had tariffs higher right now than currently we're experiencing, even though we know that those are going to go up based on Trump's policies. But the sky didn't fall in 2022. That's really all my commentary is about. So I just
Yeah,
want us to be as objective as we can in looking at the data.
sure.
This diagram is on receipts.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's a fair point though. Even I think she's right in making that point. Understand when we say the sky is falling, this is not sky is falling. It's just an unforced error. It's doing some damage. It doesn't mean that it's the end of the economy. I mean, these are the unemployment raising going up by 0.4. Let's say it was going to be 4.2 and now it's going to be 4.6, 500,000 people. That stinks, but that is not a depression. I mean, we had 22 million job loss during the pandemic. So it's just, these are things that are doing damage to the economy. And it's not just the Yale Budget Lab saying the CBO I did a slide from the CBO. It looks almost identical to this, so I didn't leave it. It's the same, almost every economic model that the different think tanks are using is going to give you this kind of an answer. And yeah, the sky did not fall. I guess it fell in 2020, but it wasn't falling in 2022 and 2023. And we had that jump in tariff revenue. So yeah, let's dig into it. I think that's a very good question, and we'll try to figure out an answer. I'm curious. So keep it up.
David,
Yep.
we have another question from Mark.
Uh-huh.
Somewhat related to tariffs, I guess. He
Okay.
asks, weren't Biden's tariffs more targeted, not wholesale, willy-nilly, off again, on again, this rate, then that, then not, then on
I mean,
again?
they definitely were not bouncing around very much. I mean, they definitely weren't doing what Trump is doing. But
Right.
as far as the targeted versus wide, I don't have a good way of answering that piece. I would assume yes, but we got to look into it.
No problem.
These are good questions. All right. I'm looking at the chat just to see if we've got any other stuff. I keep hearing about the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. Are those similar or different than what we have now? Well, the Smoot-Hawley gets a lot of credit for the Great Depression. Let's hope it doesn't get that bad. But I don't know in terms of the structure of the tariff, was it general or target? I don't know the answer to that. It's a good, get a little history. We can compare and contrast. One thing you can see in this slide is Smoot-Hawley would have been right, what is it, right around 1920, right? Or was it later? Was that around 1930? I'm guessing it was
Around
1920,
1930.
but somewhere in there was more like 1930 was in here. Okay, so
Probably
it would have
that
been, is it this guy
upward
right here?
trend after, yeah,
Yeah.
that would probably be the
So-
peak of the Smoot-Hawley.
Yeah, and I mean, we're not going to litigate the Great Depression here. I mean, Ben Bernanke explained that it was probably because the Federal Reserve let the money supply fall by, I think he said, a third, that we had a depression that was a lot longer than it needed to be and maybe could have been avoided. So that we didn't have a Fed that understood really how to manage the money supply, and to the extent that Smoot-Hawley may have been something that slowed the economy and wasn't helpful, but ultimately the Fed could have probably offset that, and they didn't. And he apologized to. It's a really good speech if you're interested in this sort of thing. It's the dedication that Bernanke did for, what is the famous conservative economist, Milton Friedman. It was on Milton Friedman's like 95th birthday or something. He kind of gave a speech talking about the contributions of Milton Friedman and the analysis of the depression that he did. And he said, I won't make that same mistake again. We will not. We will be printing money if there is a big downturn. And the Fed seems to have learned that lesson. The tariffs. Tariffs will be felt more this round because inflation has not gone down enough that people are talking about it without pay raise. We will see. To the extent that the unemployment rate goes up, people will have less bargaining power. So I don't know how this is going to affect, if it's going to affect wages, meaning people will be able to demand higher wages. I think probably not. I don't think workers are going to have as much power. We're already seeing, college graduates having trouble finding jobs, and the unemployment rate is up. You're not seeing people able to go into government jobs because those have been sort of blocked. So it's, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and we're going to see how it plays out. So far, the economy is holding it together pretty well, but you are seeing these cracks. We'll see. All right. Let's hit the next section.
David,
Finances. Yeah.
apparently Constance had a question. She says, please don't forget my question about bankruptcies. I understand they've gone up 10% under Trump.
All right. We will look at it. We'll see what the personal bankruptcies are doing under Trump.
And Sarah has her hand up, so I don't know if you'd like to take a question now or wait a little bit.
Let's wait a little bit. Let's get through the next section.
Okay.
Right. So we have what's happened, and the graph was almost the same, plus or minus a percent at the end of the Biden administration. Many of the areas of household welfare or net worth, income, stock prices, home prices, the things that affect household finances all grew a lot more than inflation if you measure from before the pandemic. And some of these measures are only quarterly, so even the monthly ones or the daily one, like the stock market, the minute by minute one, those are averages for the quarter. But still, I mean, the net worth of the bottom 50% group doubled basically during the Biden administration. Stocks almost doubled. The net 100% increase is doubling. So it went from, if you have 100, now you have 200. The 50th to 90th group, up 55%, home prices 48. All of these numbers up significantly. And the GDP, by the way, what you hear in the news when they say the GDP is growing at a 2% annual rate or 3%, that's after inflation. Nominal is including inflation. So you add the real GDP growth rate plus inflation, more or less. And that's 37% increase. It's part of why our debt to GDP ratio didn't get all that much worse. It actually fell from the peak during the Trump era because the GDP growth was so fast, including inflation. Inflation helps debtors. That's a carefully guarded secret. And inflation was 24%. So, we had a significant real wage gain. People had 6% more purchasing power, approximately. Hourly wages up 30, inflation up 24 over that period. And so there was a lot of consumers are suffering in the news. The economy was considered a liability for Biden Harris going into the election. And as Carl and I were screaming into the wind, you're not going to get a much better economy than this. And even when you break it down into the different deciles and quintiles, people were way better off than they were in 2019 before the pandemic. Yet the Democrats lost control of the media narrative. And, the rest is history. When you look at the net worth per household, so this is average across the US, if you split up the net worth of the United States, which is about 160 trillion, so that's assets minus liabilities. So that, it's basically your house value plus your stocks and bonds minus your mortgage, minus your credit card debt or whatever you owe. Your car is an asset and a liability in those numbers. Whatever you owe on your car is a liability. The value of your car is an asset. About 1.2 million per household. We're all millionaires if we split the money evenly. So not a lot of people know that, but that's how rich the United States is. In the bottom 50% group, about 60,000, up from 37 or 38,000 before. And these are adjusted for inflation. So this is in today's dollars, all of it. And you can see the percent changes there. We're up 58% versus the end of 2019. And the 50th to 90th groups, that upper middle class, also doing tremendously well over that time, about a 20% increase, $150,000 richer adjusted for inflation than we were before the pandemic. So, the Biden economy as a disaster area was always a myth, and we didn't get it across that way. The inflation number for the last month was the 0.3. That was just today, that news release. And it's always, when you're looking at inflation, it's usually a battle between shelter, which is rent, and gasoline. So that seems to be what drives a lot of these numbers. So gas was up and shelter were up. Both of them were up this month. And so you saw that boost. So that prices were 0.3% higher than they were last month. Here is the price relative to a year ago. So all the items plus 2.7%, things are 2.7% more expensive than last year. So a $100 item is now $102.70. And the core, excluding food and energy, was plus 2.9. And you can see both of them jumped up. That monthly boost, this monthly change versus the prior month, drove these numbers up pretty good here. This is the number that the Fed uses, and we don't get this data until the end of the month, so this is a little old. This is the June number, it's the May number. But the Fed wants to see that number at 2.0. That's their target. They don't use the CPI that most of us experience at the store or paying rent or everywhere else. They use this PCI number, which is a little bit lower. In terms of the Fed often talks in Fed speak, they say, are inflation expectations anchored? Meaning, are people worried that inflation is going to start surging and going up? And so they watch these squiggly lines, the red and the blue, which are the difference in the interest rate that is on the same kind of treasury bond, but one is protected from inflation and the other one is not. And so you can see what investors are expecting by looking at the difference in the interest rates on those two bonds. It's a very clever way of looking at the subject. And you can see at the very end here, they've been climbing recently. So the Fed is probably watching that carefully. They definitely don't want that to keep rising. And so you hear them speaking about not lowering rates and staying the course and watching the data. That's because they try to keep the lid on these red and blue lines. They don't want them starting to pop. This is the real wage, so how much workers are paid per hour. So recently it was 31.24 an hour. All of these are in today's dollars. This is for the bottom 80% of the private sector. So this isn't the managerial workers. This is the hourly workers that are, mostly middle to middle, working class, middle class, maybe some of the upper middle class. This is what they were getting paid per hour. Notice that throughout the Biden era, it was always higher than before the pandemic. So despite all that inflation, wages were also growing rapidly, and that bottom 80% was always better off. They had more purchasing power than we had before the pandemic. And this graph drops off as you go back in time during the Biden and during the Trump and Obama administrations. It was steadily climbing since about 2016. And so this, again, people got into why are real wages coming down? It's the end of the world, when in fact they had this fake pandemic peak here because millions of low wage workers disproportionately lost jobs. This number spiked. This is something that the Bureau of Labor Statistics explained, and journalists knew it, but they pretended that they didn't. And they complained about how, look at the real wages falling. It's the end of the world. And it's like, well, they were always better than before the pandemic. And the reason this came down for a while is because those workers started coming back to work. And once they were all back, we started to see a reversal. And also some of this is from inflation as well, climbing. But it was a combination of those two things. But again, when you're analyzing data, you've got to look at not just the rate of change, you've got to look at the level. The level was fine. It was extremely high historically, always better than before the pandemic. Throughout the Biden era, no matter how much people complained about inflation, they had more purchasing power. And the Congressional Budget Office explained that. It said in 2023, all of the income quintiles, poorest 20% to the top 20%, all had more purchasing power than 2019. And nobody knew it because the media just did not want to say that. They were on the inflation is killing people, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, it really isn't. So let me pause there. So we can look at our chat. All right. We don't have any questions right here. So let me keep powering through this and we'll finish the presentation, and then we can open it up for a discussion, a general discussion. So here's what I was saying earlier about net worth. People are always talking about how at the end of the world that the debt's going to bankrupt us. It's like, no, it isn't. It's 36-ish trillion. I've got to update this slide. It's a couple quarters old, but the message is the same. The net worth dwarfs the national debt. And not only that, but the net worth of the top 1% is way above the national debt. If you somehow paid off the national debt by extracting assets and money out of the top 1%, they would have, 49 minus 36, that's 13 trillion left. And that is almost 4 times what the bottom 50% has. To put things into perspective. So when you are hearing stories from the right wing or deficit fear mongering, just remember that the rich have all the money. And if the debt or deficit ever became a real issue, we can tax them. If people hate inflation enough, because what will happen is the government can always print money to pay off the interest or the principal on the bonds, and they will. They're not going to default. The risk becomes inflation. If people hate inflation as much as they allegedly did during the Biden era, then they will elect politicians that will tax the rich to pay that down so that we don't have an inflation crisis. There's not really a debt crisis is not a thing. You get in our country, you get an inflation crisis, and we don't have one of those. Not that's being driven by our debt. And you can see here the top 10% have 107 trillion net worth. If you somehow tax them $1 trillion of that, so about 1% away from that group, your deficit would be cut in half. It becomes more or less sustainable, meaning you could run with that pretty much forever. You wouldn't really have all these people pretending to worry about the deficit or the debt. It just would go away. And they would still get richer. The stock market, as I shared earlier, is up 50% in the last, or is up 100, it almost doubled in the last 6 years. So they'll still get richer and they'll be fine. And the deficit will be sustainable for the rest of the lives of the people that are on this call and probably our kids. The federal budget deficit this is year to date. So this is through 9 months of the fiscal year. Fiscal year runs October to September. So this is October through June. The deficit's about 65 billion more than last year. And we made up some ground. It was a bigger number last month. So the revenue's starting to come in from whatever source. And so we're actually not this deficit is not terribly different from last year. It's just a little bit slightly higher. And what's happening is, why did it go from 1.2 billion, trillion, 1273, that's 1.2 trillion, almost 1.3. Why did it go up from 1273 to 1339? The individual tax revenue's higher, so that's lowering the deficit. That's why it's green, and it's written as a negative on here. Taxes, tariffs, and other taxes are lowering, serve to improve the situation, whereas Social Security and healthcare with the aging country continue to rise. There's a lot less spent on education, mainly because Biden was doing a lot of student loan type things that have been reversed and aren't going to happen. And the FDIC, when we had that sort of mini banking crisis in 2023, paid out a lot of money in 2024. That's not happening again. So that spending is a lot lower than it was last year. So the green means it's helping you, it's reducing the deficit. The red is increasing it, and other spending, all the other categories of government spending are, the largest bucket there. But that gives you a sense of what's happening, and the revenue is coming in, just not enough to offset that spend. Nearly all of the numbers that the National Bureau of Economic Research uses to decide if there's a recession, all of them are up since the beginning of 2024, meaning we're seeing growth in a strong economy, not negative, where they would say you've got a recession. If you were to see all these numbers, or a lot of these numbers, peak and then start falling, then you've got a shot, and you've got pretty likely that there is a recession happening. And so that is not what's happening here. You're seeing all of them pretty much steadily working their way upward. If they all start turning downward, and you see that, you draw a vertical line on here, and there's a big, a peak there, and a lot of the numbers are coming down from there, then you see that for a few months, chances are we're starting a recession. These are some statistics. When you hear Trump saying prices are going down or whatever, this is a snapshot, and I'll keep sharing this every month, which is, what is the percent change in these measures from when Trump started? So he started in January. The latest data is June. Like the number of unemployed is up 2.4%. The native born employment is up 1.6%, and so on. And red means worse. Green means better. And you can see here that the employed or foreign born is down by 1.7, which makes sense if you have a big immigration restriction. But I don't know where the native born people are coming from, because there's millions of boomers retiring. And so unless they have stopped retiring or come out of retirement, these numbers just look funny, and not because the government's wrong about it. It's just, they don't make sense to me if the immigration is truly being as restricted as we think it is. And here are some numbers for sort of household finances and inflation. So when Trump says gas prices are down, no, they're actually up 2.4%. I dropped the percent sign here, up 2.4% since when he started. The piece of news that's really, I think, important here is the hourly wages are bigger than the 1.4 is bigger than the inflation. What that means is real wages, purchasing power, has gotten stronger under Trump over the past few months, and it was always strong. Again, as I mentioned, it's always been better than 2019 it was throughout the Biden era. So this is what we want to see. These inflation numbers are not a lot of inflation. It's still pretty tame. So there's nothing on here that should be particularly scary to anybody, and it's good news that the hourly wage gains are more than the inflation. In terms of taking action, there's a variety of things that you can be doing. There are different ideas. You can donate, you can write, you can put comments in places, you can march. There are a couple of, Indivisible has a website for it, and then the 5051 has another one. So there is always marches and different events going on that you can participate in. And the big one, of course, is going to be the next elections where we've got to be able to block Trump from a legislative standpoint, getting the House and the Senate back if we can. Here is where you can donate. This is Act Blue. It's a clearinghouse for where you can find any Democratic candidate or organization that you want to donate to. And here's a slide I always tell people to share. You can just grab each of the individual ones and drop it right into your social media or email your friends or whatever. But 10 of the last 11 recessions started under Republican presidents. And also, I mentioned the job creation earlier. Job creation is much faster under Democratic presidents since World War II, and it's really pronounced if you look at the last three of each party, where it's 51-1 in favor of the Democrats. And even if you start playing around with it, it becomes like 46-6. If you update this for the latest data, there's another 1 million jobs in there. The Democrats rule in this area, and we rule in pretty much every other measure since World War II. But nobody knows it. It's a carefully guarded secret. So you can read about it here. There are some sources and links for you to look at. The Democrats are better on the economy theme. There's a few sources. It's got its own Wikipedia article. It has like 20 articles underneath it you can find. I've got some stuff on Twitter that has a bunch of charts that you can use. There's CBO and the Yale Budget Lab are linked there. You can learn about OBA. And then immigrants, there's a couple of really important CBO studies. The first one talks about how much richer immigrants make us overall, and the second one talks about the costs in particular areas, which are like 1/20th the size of the benefits. So it's interesting to compare and contrast it because Americans think about the second CBO study, and that's all they think about. And the first study is much, much more important and much larger, but they ignore it. And that's where the Democrats have a communication challenge. If we're going to be a pro-immigration party, then we got to go there. Somehow my Twitter account was hacked or compromised over the past a few weeks ago. And so I'm now at a new location, which is the @DavidCharts. My blue sky is still the same. So if you were following me before, seek me out, follow me there. I tweet a lot of the charts that we have here. You can always just retweet them or grab them yourself and tweet them. If you know Twitter, you can look at the media page and you can see all of the charts there. So, and Twitter doesn't have a helpline where you can call them and get stuff fixed. You're out of luck when you have your account toast. Now I learned my lesson. I have to pay so that I can get multi-factor authentication, and people can't steal my account like they stole it before. So live and learn. This was the slide I shared earlier that the job creation is way faster under Biden. Put this in, it's in the chat. No matter how you slice it, Biden and Obama second term both faster than Trump. And that's that. So I'm going to stop sharing. And let's take any questions that we have from the audience.
Okay.
Right.
Sarah's hand is back up. Go ahead, Sarah.
So can I speak?
Yes, you can.
Okay, so sorry, I have to move my vehicle. First statement is the tariffs and the threats. Once there's a threat out there, everybody's like, okay, I need to go buy this before the tariff hits. So aren't the numbers actually being manipulated this way so that the end of the quarter can look so much better than, what's about to happen? Because this 90-day threat of a tariff. And isn't that also helping to control the stock market? So in other words, is this a manipulation in order for the numbers to look good?
On the second part of that, the stock market and the manipulation, I would say no. But on the first part, in terms of the distortion, what you're seeing is when people front loaded the imports, meaning they bought a tremendous amount of imports in the first quarter of the year, what that did is it lowered GDP. Imports are a reduction in GDP. And so the GDP was a loss. It was a minus 0.5 growth rate in the first quarter. The economy shrank technically because people didn't buy stuff that was made by US workers. We bought stuff made overseas. And we did that, people did
Okay.
that to front load the tariffs to get ahead of them. Now, can they, in terms of manipulating numbers, if I guess from an accounting standpoint, if you bought a lot of cheaper stuff and are going to be selling that inventory over a longer period when everything else is more expensive, if you did that more successfully than your competitors, then your profits may look a little bit better for a while, but then you will depreciate, you'll get out of that inventory, it will be gone, and then you will be caught up with your competitors. So a corporation could have a quarter or two, maybe three, where they look a little better than maybe some of their competitors that didn't buy quite as stockpile, quite as large a bunch of imports. But to see that across, it would be difficult to see that across the entire stock market. You might see a competitor in an industry that did it better than somebody else, but to make the numbers, I don't think you could get away with that because you're not going to be doing better than your peer group.
Well, I was wondering because of the timing of these tariffs and the threats of.
Yeah, I have to think about it some more, but I don't think it's going to manipulate the stock market very much. I think people get a sense of what a corporation is going to be paying. If they're paying more for tariffs, they know how much that is approximately, and the industry is going to be talking about it. They're talking with the Wall Street analysts. They're going to say this is what we're up against, and some companies have had big declines. They're more exposed to tariffs, and their profits have taken a hit. There's a company I like, LyondellBasell, for example, LYB, based out of Norway. They were expected to take a lot of hits for whatever reason from their, I think it's Norway. They were Europe, East Scandinavia somewhere, based on their exposure to tariffs, and that stock dropped by like a third. And so there are companies that are taking big hits because of tariffs, and there are others that are doing fine. Like you've seen the big tech companies, NVIDIA, Broadcom, anybody in that sort of AI space is just going through the roof. So, overall, the stock market is slightly ahead of where it was when Trump was inaugurated. And I don't think it's
Right.
false. I don't think it's false. I think it's just, the Wall Street people are very smart. They know that, yeah, corporations are going to take a hit a little bit, and they'll probably pass those costs along to consumers, which is what they're supposed to do. And their profit, not supposed to, but that's what's going to happen, and their profits will be fine. They will raise their prices because their costs are going up, and they're very good at that. Nike was in the news a few weeks ago, saying they're going to raise their prices. And, a lot of companies are doing it quietly because they don't want to draw Trump's attention, probably. Good question. Next one.
Okay, we have Murtaza. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly, sir.
Yeah, that's correct. Just to the previous speaker's point, Sarah's point, I've also heard that a lot of companies overbought on inventory, being afraid of significant size tariffs, and that's part of why inflation is not rising as quickly as expected, is because the inventory is being sold off at lower prices.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, they can get away with it for a while, right? That makes sense.
Okay, thank you. And I believe we have a question in the chat from Bruce. He says, not for tonight, but it would be interesting to know the reality of the possibilities of China and Japan cashing in federal bonds. How does the discussions and planning of China to create alternative economic systems excluding the U.S.?
It's an excellent question, and that's a good topic. I'm writing these down. I think that's an interesting one. I will just tell you that people have been scared of that would happen, that China or somebody would sell U.S. bonds, and it's very difficult for them to actually do that, because it's complicated, but it involves international trade and having to get dollars to buy our stuff and where they put their savings money. But you deserve a good answer for that, and let me research it and put it in English so that we can all understand it.
Okay, I believe that is it. Unless I missed something. So if I missed your question, please raise your hand.
Right. Well, we made it to 9 o'clock. That's pretty good. You guys, the 36 that survived 2 hours of this, you are a hardy bunch. So congratulations and thank you for listening for this and all the good questions.
Right.
Christine, should we do a closing?
Somebody asked if the slides are going to be available.
I posted the link to the
Yeah.
slides.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. And yeah, they should have been emailed to everybody too with from Carl. If not, I don't know what is our process for getting an email so they get on the list, Carl? How do we do that?
I believe if they're signed up, they should get a recap if you guys are doing it. Otherwise, Christine did put the link for the slides in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
'cause
then typically, let me see if I'm off mute. Yes. Typically, everybody that has signed up, not only for this particular session, but for the previous fiscal, get copies of the slides. They get copies of the link to the slides, and they get a link. They get notified that the video will appear in our YouTube account in a several days.
It's up there right now. We streamed the whole thing.
Wow. Okay.
awesome.
Voila.
So nobody cuss. We got to close off the recording before we do anything. Can we stop recording?
Sure.